The year is 1960. The Cold War has reached a fever pitch. The Russians have launched Sputnik. They've shot down US spy planes and are building their own intercontinental ballistic missiles. And the US Air Force finds itself in a position where it needs a new bomber, a plane that can cut through Russian airspace and hit any target in the country before the Soviet air defenses can even detect it. Enter the aptly named Valkyrie. As far as aircraft go, the Valkyrie was unusual, but as far as top-secret classified projects go, it was completely insane. No one in the US military thought that North American Aviation, a small company based in California with only a few successful aircraft under its belt, would win the contract. But North American Aviation wasn't just going to build the best plane ever seen. They were going to do it for half the cost of their competitors. The US military wanted a bomber that could fly at least Mach 3, carry a nuclear payload, and cruise continuously for around 20 hours. Back then, the best planes couldn't even hit Mach 2 without overheating, so the Air Force was prepared to be disappointed. But what they got instead was unbelievable. Over the next 5 years, North American Aviation built a plane that could do everything the military asked for, and then some. Not only did it hit the required specifications, but it shattered them. The Valkyrie was the first plane ever to use a principle known as compression lift, which allowed it to maintain level flight at Mach 3 by harnessing its own sonic boom. But the real magic happened when the pilots tested the plane. Instead of maxing out at Mach 2 like previous aircraft, the Valkyrie kept climbing and climbing until it hit a staggering Mach 3.3 or 2,000 miles per hour. To put that in perspective, that's almost as fast as a bullet. In fact, when you're watching this video, someone could fire a gun from the nose of the Valkyrie, and the bullet would catch up with it. Before long, the US military found itself in possession of a bomber that could reach any part of the Soviet Union within an hour, much faster than ICBMs of the day. And it could be back on American soil within minutes. From start to finish, the entire mission would take less than 2 hours. For all intents and purposes, the war was already over. To make things worse for the Soviets, the Valkyrie could fly twice as high as contemporary planes, peaking at 80,000 feet. That meant it was well out of the range of most Soviet anti-aircraft missiles. The Valkyrie was an engineering masterpiece. Its designers found innovative ways to cut weight wherever they could. The prototype didn't even have a radar because the plane was so fast that there was no time for air traffic control to track it. It didn't need navigation systems either, since it was going to fly along predetermined paths that would take it directly to its target. These design choices might seem odd, but they were deliberate attempts to trim down the aircraft as much as possible, and it worked. The Valkyrie ended up being 30% lighter than the B-52 bomber it was replacing. Speed isn't everything when it comes to military aircraft, but in the case of the Valkyrie, it was most everything. The bomber could outrun any Soviet fighter jet, and thanks to its incredible climb rate, it could be above most air defense systems before they even knew it was there. But all this speed and altitude came with a problem. At those kinds of speeds, the air grows thin and combustible. Engine failure would mean certain death. But the Valkyrie solved this by having 8 engines instead of 4, meaning that even if 4 engines failed, it could limp back home on the other 4. But as impressive as the Valkyrie was, it would have been impossible without the work of one man, a reclusive genius named Harry Hilliker. You see, the reason the Valkyrie could fly so fast was because of its wings, and the reason those wings worked was because of a phenomenon known as compression lift. Most aircraft wings are curved on the top and flat on the bottom, so that when air moves over them, it flows faster above than below. Faster air means lower pressure, so this pressure differential creates lift. The problem is that this type of lift isn't very strong. If you want to increase lift, you have to increase the surface area of your wing. But increasing surface area makes the plane heavier, which requires even more lift, and that leads to more surface area, and it becomes a vicious cycle. Enter Harry Hill, a former aeronautical engineer with Boeing, who had become obsessed with designing a plane that could fly faster than sound. Unlike his colleagues, Hiller didn't think it was impossible, and he spent years in his garage working on his ideas. In 1947, he had his breakthrough. He realized that instead of trying to beat the laws of physics, he could use them. His idea consisted of having 2 sets of wings. The first set would provide lift like normal wings, but the second set would be angled backwards, so that they act like an airfoil and compress the air in front of them. This compression would push the air downward, creating even more lift. In other words, he figured out how to make a plane that could use its own sonic boom to stay airborne. When Hiller first presented his ideas to Boeing, they weren't interested. The company was working on a new transcontinental plane, and Hiller's idea didn't fit in with their plans. But Hiller was determined to prove that his idea worked. So he quit his job at Boeing and started his own company. He called it North American Aviation. One day, Hiller decided to enter a design competition sponsored by the Air Force. The goal was to design an aircraft that could fly from New York to London in 3 hours. Almost every major aircraft manufacturer in the country entered the competition, but Hiller was confident that his design would win. After all, he knew that his plane could easily break the sound barrier and fly from New York to London in just 2 hours and 12 minutes. The judges were blown away by his design, and North American Aviation won the contract. Hiller had finally proven that his idea worked, but he wouldn't live to see it come to fruition. He died of a heart attack in 1950, but his legacy lived on in the Valkyrie. Today, we take it for granted that aircraft can fly supersonic, but it wasn't easy. In fact, most of the early Valkyries couldn't even get close to Mach 2 without breaking apart. But as the engineers fine-tuned the design, the plane became more stable. By the time the first prototype was ready for testing, it could do everything the Air Force had asked for and then some. The Air Force was thrilled. They had a bomber that could strike anywhere in the Soviet Union and be back before the Soviets could respond. It was the perfect weapon for mutually assured destruction. But there was a problem. While the Valkyrie was being developed, military technology was rapidly evolving. As it turned out, intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, were much cheaper to build and maintain than bombers, and they were fast enough to reach any part of the Soviet Union in a matter of minutes. In fact, the first submarine-launched ballistic missile became operational in 1960, just as the Valkyrie was entering service. The Valkyrie was supposed to be the future of warfare, but it ended up being a relic of the past. The sad thing is that the Valkyrie was a victim of its own success. The Air Force had been so impressed by the bomber that it ordered 14 of them, even though it knew that ICBMs were the future. But the Air Force wasn't the only one who was impressed by the Valkyrie. The public was, too. When the plane first flew, newspapers across the country ran stories about it, and people flocked to airports to watch it perform at air shows. For a few glorious years, the Valkyrie was a symbol of American power. But as it turned out, that power was short-lived. By the mid-1960s, it was clear that the Valkyrie was obsolete. ICBMs were cheaper, faster and more accurate. The Air Force tried to find a new purpose for the bomber, but nothing stuck. Eventually, it was retired and sent to a museum. Today, it's still there, a reminder of a time when speed and power were everything. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. We've made videos about a lot of insane machines, but none have been quite like the Valkyrie. We hope you enjoyed learning about it as much as we enjoyed making the video. Thanks for watching.